Hi, everyone. I'm not sure where everyone is joining from today for this live stream. I wanted to say thanks for joining this episode of Unpacking Process. This particular episode will be myself solo talking through one part of the Bullseye Customer Sprint. So for those of you who are tuning in live, I would love for you to drop in the chat where you're listening or watching from, and then what you expect to learn today. There's no right or wrong answers here. I just want to set expectations, and so that way maybe I can modulate a little bit of what we talk about. Live streams are a little bit different than joining a meeting and being able to throw in formal questions and answers, but I want this ultimately to be of value to folks who are jumping in. So wherever you are, whether you're joining live right now on LinkedIn or on YouTube, just go ahead and say where you're listening or watching from, and then what you expect to learn today. And even if you're watching later, either on LinkedIn or YouTube, I would love to hear same thing. Where are you listening from? Where are you watching from? And then what you expect to learn today. So thank you again for joining this session of Unpacking Process. I let's go ahead and kind of jump into what I have planned to talk about. So, by way of introduction, we'll get into, I'll do a little bit of signposting so you know what we're talking about today. So, we'll start with me, who I am, why I'm here, some of my context. We'll start there. We'll set them context broadly about what the one-liner is, how it's important, why it's important, and then ultimately bounce back up to the Bullseye Customer Sprint because the customer one-liner is a part of the Bullseye Customer Sprint. I will stop for questions along the way. You can leave them in the chat, and I'll bring them up on stage, or I'll address them as they come in, however it makes sense to address them. So, who am I? It's a great question. I am Skipper Chung Warson, and I run a services practice called How This Works Co. And one of the important things about the work that I do is that I primarily work in this area of customer discovery and other kinds of product strategy with early stage startups. And specifically, I have a process called the Bullseye Customer Sprint, where we're able to just really focus in on who. There are many words for this. You can use the word bullseye customer. You can also use words like lighthouse customer, first customer, best customer, narrow ICP, things like that. But the idea being that once you focus in on who that is, you go and you talk to at least five of them to start for that directional. Then you'll have a much better idea of what you should be building within your team. When I was prepping for this talk, I came across this particular line, two lines, and I thought it was really salient based on what we're talking about today. And I think I'll say who said this initially, but I think there's something really important about this idea around theorizing before you have all the evidence, right? It's a capital mistake to theorize before you have all the evidence. It biases the judgment. And in my mind, when I was reading this, I thought, wow, this sounds like it could have come out of a book today. So whether it was today or the near past or the distant past, I knew what I was reading. However, I was surprised by the context and how it really plays into what I'm talking about today. And it was written by Sir Arthur Conan Doyle and written in the Sherlock Holmes story, A Study in Scarlet. So definitely very salient given what we're talking about. And I think it's still as true today, even if it takes place within a fictional detective's time frame and setting, I still think that we make all sorts of decisions without the proper evidence. And I know that he's a detective, also one who had many stories and things of that nature, also fictional. But I think that this is as important today as it ever was in a Sherlock Holmes story. So this is the primary place in which I do work as a service provider, and I think with this particular headline, you can fill in the blank in a lot of different places. You can, this headline as written says why many early stage startups build the wrong thing, and I think that is true. That feels true. That is something that I have seen. However, this could be early stage startups. This could be a solo practice. This could be a later stage startup, so a growth stage startup. It could be a scale up. It could be some company within the enterprise. It could be more broad, right? This idea of why products don't succeed, why features fail. Um, and I think it's because, not I think, in my experience and what I have seen is that most teams and companies imagine what they hope that customers want, not actual human needs, desires, pain points, goals, etc. And if the idea is that only humans buy anything, then if you're grafting onto this human, this idealized or um, generic state of who this person might be, I like to call this customer cosplay, right? And this is not dressing up as some character from fiction. Maybe it's Sherlock Holmes. We just use that example. But this cosplay doesn't come from things you find in your closet or pieces that you might buy in order to dress up like this character, but it's cobbled together from a team's biases. And it comes from the biases. It's concocted information. Maybe it's pulled from AI these days. But unless this is based on real people and their stories about what they've done, their needs, their desires, their pain points, this is just a guess. And it's a guess based on context from a imaginary time, right? And if it is from a previous time, then it might not even be relevant, right? It may be something that's made up, and so so it's out of place, out of time, and so what's the result for a team that's building something? And there's any number of results, but there could be customer churn or no customers show up. Maybe the sales team has some amount of chaos and entropy. They can't explain to someone why they should care. Confused prospects, and ultimately just dumping money down the drain, which is not in the best interest of any business or any team that's building something. And so then it brings up the question, what does this cost, right? So what? What does it matter? So if we're not basing this on talking to human beings about what they need, what they want, what their pain points are, what does it matter, right? Many companies and teams do this all the time. And we're not just talking about an awkward meeting or a couple extra things that make it onto the roadmap. Um, when you're working on such a team when things feel off, right? There's something about the planning, like, is this really the right thing to work on? There's that uncertainty, deal stall, and maybe you chalk this up to positioning, not enough iteration, or needing more features. Um, but most don't take into account that this is about operating from a made up map. So is it true? Well, we're not sure. So if the map is made up, how do you know that you're going in the right direction? When you're not in regular conversation with real humans, you don't just miss a feature or two. You end up making bets on the wrong problem entirely, right? You build up a case for something that may not be true at all. And so that becomes a problem when you need someone to buy something. And What fills up that vacuum is all sorts of things. Opinions, right? And maybe it's the loudest stakeholder. Maybe it's the confident co-founder, whoever sold the last deal, whoever has the most equity. And because no one's checking these bets around reality, what's actually going on in the world, what's happening in the world now, these end up compounding, right? One wrong assumption gets baked into the next decision and the next and the next. And it's a bit like a house of cards. And the roadmap calcifies. You've announced things, you've hired, you've committed, and there's no clean way to get out of the thing that you've committed to without losing face. Teresa Torres, author of Continuous Discovery Habits, calls this the fixed roadmap problem because it communicates false certainty when you need flexibility the most. And none of this is abstract. At any given moment, a product team, let's say 5 people, 5 people on that product team, fairly small product team, but 5 people nevertheless. If you are working in this way where you are unsure about why you're building something, where is the evidence, that has a cost to it, right? You have to pay salaries or equity, so value of the company, those sorts of things. And so a small product team, like I said, 5 people, is burning through about $40,000 a month. And if this is on vibes or bias or assumptions or this cosplay idea, then that's a quite expensive exercise to be doing that. Over the course of 6 months, that ends up being about 250K. And this cost is just the salary, right? I didn't account into it equity. I didn't account things like tools or agency fees before, like any sort of ads that might be driving traffic to this product that wasn't really validated in the first place. But every week you're working with a made up customer is a week of that budget just going straight to things that have been made up, vibes, right? Assumptions, things that that you believe to be true. So I'll pause there. I don't see any comments coming into StreamYard, but I've had this problem before. So I want to actually just tune into the LinkedIn really quickly. I don't have it open for sake of focus, but let me just open it really quickly, see if there are any questions coming through on the stream itself that might need to be addressed, because this is something that I also want this to be interactive, right? As people are watching this and seeing this come through, are there things that are coming up? So, okay, so here I am on the page. We'll keep that over here in the corner. Great. Okay. So here we are. I have the window open now in a place where I can see it. I had it hidden in the corner, but I'll keep it down here in case things are coming through. StreamYard doesn't show me that something is coming through, but if you have questions throughout, just drop it in the chat. I'm happy to talk through something very specifically. So the purpose and focus of this particular session today is walking through the second step of 9 in my sprint structure. And the idea here being that this can be done in as quickly as an hour, and in my experience, should be done with a whole team for best results. So I'll walk you through the method. I'll show you a few different working examples. And at the end of this, send me a message. I'll send you the step-by-step guide written up in a DIY format that specs this out. Next week, I'll be putting it behind a paywall and available, but there will be a cost to it. But if you send me a note this week around getting the step-by-step guide, and hopefully you try it out, I'd love feedback. In addition to the 12 different startup teams that I've worked with, I would love to hear how this works for you, and places where I might be able to make it better. So what we're doing in this activity, we're starting all together. And the first part is about extracting what we already believe about our Bullseye customer. And the idea here being that it's a bit like dumping it all out, like if you have a messy drawer and you're working through it together. And then sharpening that into a single sentence specific enough to recruit against. So if you have customers, great. You should have all sorts of information here. You should have things like support tickets, help requests, notes from sales calls, maybe even exit interviews or exit notes, like why people canceled. If you don't have customers or you don't have that context, that's also okay, because the group interview, the first part of this, will be the starting point. And just remember, this isn't about getting it perfect. It's about getting it specific enough to act on. So before we get too far into the process, let's look at a preview of what we'll be assembling. Take a sip of coffee. So this sort of one-liner, these are the basic ingredients. There's a couple more refining details later, but this is where we start. And this is 80 to 90% of what you'll be assembling. And you'll see it's a bit of a Mad Libs. First, so let's just read through it together. So the framing is for a product team or a company. The idea is that we're going after a specific role at a specific place who has some kind of trigger or motivation, and currently has at hand some sort of inadequate solution, painful solution, solution that doesn't meet their needs, etc. But what they actually need is this outcome. And so for folks who know the jobs to be done paradigm, or even the how might we, there are some similar parts to this that live inside of that other those other paradigms. And so specific role could be a specific person, rather, it could be a role or a specific situation. Then the specific place, it could be something around company type or size. Maybe it's some other paradigm. Maybe it's geography, right? Maybe it's a company in the United States. Maybe it's something to do with Europe because of privacy laws or manufacturing standards. And then trigger motivation. This could be also the moment that sets us into motion, right? What is this thing that's starting? Is it the beginning of a day? Is it a quarterly reporting cycle? And then inadequate solution, it could be what they're doing now instead. Keep in mind that solution might be so inadequate that it's do nothing, right? And then outcome, what they want on the other side of this. And so often when I talk about this paradigm and I show the one-liner and I show about how it might work, uh, people ask, well, how do I get this information, right? And we talked a little bit about, or I mentioned before, you can pull it from customer service logs. You can glean some of that information. If you have a sales team, you could talk to them. What are they hearing? But some of the things that you could be asking are around that person. Who is that? Who is that person? So who is the person that is feeling this most acutely, right? Like they have the situation. What do they do day to day? What's a title of the person that might have this going on in their world? That's really helpful because you can map it. Say this is something that a chief of product has to deal with versus a maybe a controller or a developer. Then the idea of that place, right? At what stage does that or size does this become urgent versus ignorable, right? Is it industry specific? Does it only happen in the energy space? Does it only happen within the health space? Is there a team structure, right? Is there a size? Is there something to do with, are there multiple teams, right? There's a communication problem. What has to be true about the company for this problem to actually even exist in the first place, right? It's not necessarily every company. And then this idea of what was the moment they went from we should fix this to we have to fix this now, right? Was there a specific event? Was it a something changed in the market? Was it a lost deal? Was there a recent hire that came on? And what are they actually doing right now to handle this, right? What are they actually doing instead? That is really important. Why haven't they replaced it yet? Is there a sunk cost involved? Is there some sort of other solution that's too embedded into the company? And then what does this feel like for them, right? Is the outcome, what does better look like? Is that about speed? Is it about confidence, visibility, or maybe something else that you're not considering, right? And that really helps to build out what are the parts of the one-liner. And one thing is, as you're going through this, you know, how do you know that you've fleshed it out enough, right? The idea is being more specific than less specific. So one thing that I often ask is, can you use the exact phrasing in a screening questionnaire? Can you use it to find this kind of person within um, this out there in the world, right? Um, and there are a couple places where this goes off the wires. So number one, the answer is, technically yes, you can use it for screening, but you've let the wrong people through, right? You're being too broad. So let me give you an example. Let's say you're looking for a founder, right? That is fairly specific. It could be more specific, but let's just say you're looking for a founder. And one of the things that that founder is struggling with is customer discovery. So yeah, sure, you can fashion that into a Bullseye Customer. But if you were to ask people that, half the room would raise their hand. That's not a screener. That's just a tactic to get lots of hands up in the air, lots of agreement, right? You haven't filtered anyone out. You've just confirmed that the problem is uncommon or it's common, right? So the other place where this potentially fails is the team doesn't know why they stall. And the thing is when you're going through this exercise with a team and they're buying time or they're making excuses or I don't know that this is exactly right, there's something it's really natural to feel like you need to step out and be broader about this. So not just founders, but then maybe founding teams or people who are thinking about starting, like ramping up a startup. And this stall or this tendency to drop into the vagary, it's not a dead end, it's actually a diagnosis, right? There's something there. So understanding that, and we'll see in a moment as we go through the one-liner, just because you establish what the one-liner is for the first piece of work, it doesn't mean that this is your Bullseye customer forever. Bullseye customers are not forever. Customer clarity doesn't last forever, right? This is something that is uh, of this moment in time. And so you need to establish what is the first customer to go after, and then you can fashion around that what is on your product roadmap. Um, so if you do pass the test and you've got your starting point, great. But if you don't, which word would you change first? And so when you go through this process, you're going to make a few of them. I recommend aiming for 10 to 15. I think more is better in this case. And then you make a bunch of them, and the visual on this screen is for a previous client. And there's actually half and half. When we first started working together and we actually went through the Bullseye customer sprint, they thought that their Bullseye customer was a CFO. And you can see a few different versions of that in the top three. However, after talking to 5 of these CFOs, and we picked one, after talking to 5 of these very specific type of CFOs, I believe my memory serves me correctly. The third one was the one that we actually ran the sprint with. We actually determined that while CFOs were the buyer or the champion of the work that this particular company was doing, this fintech was doing, the customer that actually felt the pain were the controllers. So, um, so the idea is, so you've got first three, second three, and the idea is that you do some dot voting, right? As a group, as a team. Who is the Bullseye customer that have been framed together? Like who is the one that you should go after first? Because the ones that you don't pick, they aren't gone. They don't go anywhere. They become your second, third, and fourth customer to find. This idea of tertiary or inner ring versus outer ring customer. You just can't, depending on the size of your team, maybe you can, maybe you have enough people to do this, but typically you don't have enough focus and resources to work on all of them at once. So the idea is start with one because the rest will be waiting. They will be other types of customers that you can investigate. But the idea is to start with one and confirm that this indeed is how they might solve their problem, then move on to who's next. So let's drop in and make sure there are no comments or questions as we're going through. I don't see anyone leaving any sort of notions there. I hope that this is helpful for people. And as I said before, drop in if you're joining this later. Drop in to the chat some notion of, or connect with me rather, connect with me and let me know that you're interested in this framework. Oh, it doesn't. And I can just share with you. Next week, I'll be making it a paid product. But for right now, I'm happy to share the current iteration of it, how you can do this in your own practice, in your own team. So let's look at it in an actual working example. So last year, I started working with one particular client who was working in the developer tool space and specifically was building a vibe coding app. And we did the kickoff and we did the initial alignment. We established what our critical question was. And we thought that the Bullseye customer was ops managers. And the logic was pretty simple. Ops managers and ops leads, these are folks who are drowning in manual data workflows, right? Like coordinating things, making sure that the right information is moving from point A to point B, maybe even point A to point B to point C, with some processes that happen in between. These really are, these kinds of ops people are still the glue of most any organization. And maybe they're moving data between spreadsheets, or maybe the spreadsheet is a workaround between like HubSpot or Salesforce or something else. And our hypothesis was that a vibe coding tool, which allows you to build apps without being some sort of developer or coder and doing it through prompting, natural language process, this could be their ultimate superpower. So when we were working through this, we began to build some of these one-liners around this idea of an ops manager. And here are three that we built for this paradigm. And you can see they're all kind of ops managers, ops leads. They're at a variety of different, they work in tech generally. That middle one, I think we're more general about fast growing organizations. So some of these wouldn't even pass. Some of these examples that I pulled for the sake of variety probably wouldn't pass the can we recruit against this. We would have to be more specific about that second one. What is a fast growing organization? And we can apply very specific metrics to it. They've, hired 50 people in the last year or, some such. And the idea being that there's you can make repetition inside of these one-liners, right? They don't have to be mutually exclusive. You can see that all of them revolve around ops folks, managers, and leads. And we ended up doing this in 2 different rounds with about 10 versions with an email in between. So we didn't just do a Bullseye customer sprint with this particular client. We did the sprint and then we extended it because we weren't sure what we were hearing. So we actually extended it with weekly customer interviews. So this was a not uncommon case. I've had a few clients who have done this, but they were able to go beyond the 5 live interviews and really get that confirmation that it was not, or it was or wasn't what we expected. So this is something that we heard from those ops folks. I'd rather deal with the inefficiency that I know, right? Sort of that idea of the devil you know, than risk configuring something wrong. And so we shifted. We went from this idea of an ops manager to, some notion of who else would benefit from this kind of vibe coding technology. So we got the team together again, and we looked at who else had been signing up. We looked for some of the signals within the Discord. They actually were running a bit of a campaign, let's call it, but this idea of vibe coded outputs or apps being broken, and so that they could be fixed. So we formulated this notion of a non-technical builder that had stakes, and we came up with a few versions of it. And here are 3 that we pulled out from there. And as I recall, I think we came up with maybe 15 again versions of this. And I tried to pick the ones that were most different for demonstration for this slide. But we talked to about 20 more people here, and we changed this slightly in between because we weren't exactly sure what we were seeing. And then ultimately, we more recently have shifted one more time. And now we're on so with that campaign that they were running around fixing your vibe coded dreams, we're now working on the debugging side of the product. And the company now has 2 different offerings in addition to their chatbot. And one is an MCP offering that plugs in directly into a developer's environment, as well a Chrome extension that can live on top of other vibe coded coding tools. Tools like Replit or Lovable, or even Cloud Code is technically for folks that are not technically. Cloud Code is more likely for more technical folks, so they might plug into the MCP offering, but it could even plug into something like there. And this is where these one-liners come from. So this notion of being very specific around who is the Bullseye customer for this debugging layer? What does that look like? And these are specifically the Chrome extension ones. So I would be remiss if here in May 2026, I didn't talk about AI, because AI can help these processes to consider some of the edge cases that we may not be thinking of in our narrow time boxes. And so, yes, as you can see from this presentation, you can do all of this in a whiteboarding tool. I am of the opinion that humans are very capable and that that's where it should start, with human input and known evidence. But then after that initial session where there's some amount of agreement, alignment, dot voting, you have that 10 to 15 different sort of one-liners that hopefully you can recruit against all of them. Then I would say that this is an opportunity to enlist your AI tool of choice. So whether you use Claude or you use ChatGPT or Gemini or whatever it is, you can find some of the edges by inputting the one-liners, adding in your company context, and then prompting some version of, based on this, what haven't we considered, right? The question that I put here is, based on this, what questions should I be asking that I haven't considered or the team hasn't considered? And this breaks the starting points, right, into new questions, right? Maybe it fractalizes into other areas and brings up other risks that we might have missed. But ultimately, whatever it is that is prompted and received from the AI tool, these suggestions all need to come back to the team, right? So parse it into, are there refinements that are necessary for the one-liners? Are there other sort of subject matters or areas that need to be addressed? Because this is, I think, the most important part of leveraging AI. But using human judgment to decide which AI patterns are worth acting on and then which ones are just noise. So we start with humans. We do that context setting work, bringing in evidence, and then we can use AI to expand and maybe even challenge the thinking, the assumptions, the hypotheses that we've created. And then ultimately we finish with the human accountability. This needs to feel right to the team. Just because AI said something doesn't necessarily mean that that's the right thing to focus in on. So I'll pause again there. And I realize now that the gap between what I see on the streaming platforms and my actual speaking in this live stream is actually a little bit wider than I thought. I tracked it before at about 20 to 30 seconds. And I think there might be just a little bit longer of a gap than I thought. So I'm going to pause here for a moment before we zoom out and we get into some of the other details around the Bullseye Customer Sprint and see if anyone has any questions that they want to drop into the chat. Um, I'm looking at the LinkedIn. Uh, I'll go back and see if there's anything that's happening within the YouTube a little bit later. But at least I'll drop in here. So my face looks frozen on LinkedIn. Hopefully that's not true. Okay. So let's zoom out. And in this zoom out state, I want to talk just a little bit about how this fits into the Bullseye Customer Sprint. So in the sprint itself, there are 3 different phases. And the goal of the sprint is to move your team from I think to they said is what I often say. So the idea of this is a thing that we believe, these are ideas that we have, and then this is what we heard other human beings say. So there are 3 phases. There's this notion of the hypothesis, this idea of getting the facts, the interviews, user testing, and then ultimately the direction and action, what you do after you look at the hypothesis, you recruit against the hypothesis, you talk to those people, right, in a half and half discovery, half user testing paradigm, and then you figure out what you're doing next. So first, establishing the critical question, staking your customer hypothesis. And part of that, the second step is building out the one-liner, building out the canvas, then recruiting for and running 5 customer interviews. Your whole team, by the way, watches live. This isn't something that is recorded and then watched later. The idea being that the whole team can contribute or ask more questions during the actual interview. So let's say I'm running the interview and I keep a sidebar of Google Chat, or maybe it's Discord or Slack or whatever the team uses, that they can throw in additional questions where we can ask more deeply about something that's come up. I've also found this helpful, especially with the aforementioned developer tools client that I have, because they can also brief me a little bit about this is what they mean by this phrase. So it's a little bit like having a voice in my ear. And then debriefing after each one, and then ultimately deciding whether or not that's the right direction. Because sometimes the idea is that this feels robust, but it's may not be the right bullseye customer, and that has to be rejiggered. You can see that in some of the ways in which I talked about previous work. You'll be answering a couple questions here, like who is your best customer, and then ultimately why do they choose you? And in this situation, finding out who isn't your customer, it's still a win, because you have found out no way earlier than most people do. And knowing who isn't your customer can also be as valuable as knowing who is. So don't want to understate that. And then I want to address this notion of return on investment. We did some at the beginning of the call around this idea of the amount of money that you're going to spend on having a product team making this, even if you're using AI as a boost. Um, so team spends 6 months operating on a hunch, right? Even if you're um, coding it with AI tools, vibe coding it, whatever the paradigm is, you're not just losing time, you're losing money, right? This is high speed execution without having that sort of strategic clarity. I think about the example from James Clear's book, Atomic Habits, where he talks about a plane that is ready to take off from LAX, so the main airport of Los Angeles, and is initially pointed towards New York City. That's the path. And I understand that when you fly a plane, it's not exactly that sort of like A to B, but you're pointed to New York City, and you move that plane just 6 feet to the right. So if that plane flies in a straight line from where it's been reset, then that plane will land in Washington, D.C. Very different than New York City. Probably a lot of really unhappy customers. But some of the things that you're avoiding by doing something like the Bullseye Customer Sprint is you're getting rid of that scattered marketing, right? Generic messaging that's just covering all the bases. You are more efficient with development time, right? And that's human and AI processes. So whether that's the dollar and time cost of humans or the token and time cost of AI, and so you're not building features that users won't pay for. And then the last thing is about investor skepticism. You're taking out that idea of having these confident sounding guesses with a trustworthy methodology. You're creating a flywheel of evidence. You move from too much information or too much bias or too much assumption, um, that push and pull between fact and fiction, where you're landing in a place where things are more sane from an operational perspective, where you align your team around a crystal clear hypothesis. You test it, you do the due diligence around having those 5 conversations, which are enough for directionality, not necessarily qualitative accuracy, but you're able to say, we think this is right. And so, in doing a Bullseye Customer Sprint, this isn't just about helping you to work faster, or altogether. Those are definitely parts of it. We're giving you product market fit signals that you can read, right? You have evidence. People have said this. And so you can turn that $20,000 investment, which is how much a Bullseye Customer Sprint costs, into the foundation for your next stage of growth, to how you scale. So here you can reach out to find out more. Of course, send me a direct message. Happy to have a conversation with you about how this might look. Even just a small part of it, like doing the Bullseye Customer one-liner, can provide quite a lot of um, impact and having you move in the right direction. I also want to say here that part of doing this webinar is, number one, getting this information out into the world. So if you're watching this later on a replay, thanks for listening in. If it's within a week of May 19th, give or take, and you send me a direct message, whether it's through my website or here on LinkedIn or even on YouTube, if you send me a message, I'm happy to share the DIY version of what the Bullseye Customer one-liner could look like, because I find that this is one of the most tactical ways you can get really clear on who your first best customer is, that Bullseye customer, which can really set you in the right direction. Make sure that you're flying from LAX to New York rather than flying from LAX to New York, but ending up in Washington, D.C. So I'll pause here for questions to see if anything comes through on the various paradigms, either StreamYard or in LinkedIn. And I'll take a sip of coffee. Can you really do something on camera without actually narrating it? Things like, I'm going to share my screen. I'm going to take a sip of coffee. All of those things. And this is a good pause to wait for the live stream to catch up um, with the actual place that we are. I hope that the stream itself, it looks, from what I can see on my browser, it looks like it's starting and stopping. I don't see my face moving, so hopefully that's not the case. Funny anecdote. This is my third or fourth time working through this content as a live stream, and there is a lot to be desired about the live streaming experience. Not necessarily from the side of StreamYard or even LinkedIn or YouTube, but I feel like there's a real missed opportunity. So I don't see any questions coming through. Let me know if you have any other questions as you go through this live stream. I'll hang out here on LinkedIn if you want to send me a direct message for the next 15 minutes or so. But I want to say thank you for your time and attention. Like everything else that I've talked about in terms of framing out who your customer focus is, getting that customer clarity, doing this kind of discovery work, this is all an experiment. And I've been lucky enough to have 12 different startup teams come along with me for the journey. And I hope that this can be helpful and useful to other people. So find me on LinkedIn, find me at howthisworks.co, and happy to have a conversation, see how this fits or it doesn't fit for you. I have a product and design background, but I am not a salesperson. So my goal isn't necessarily to hard sell you on something. It's really to make sure that you and your team and whatever construct that you work in are able to leverage some of these best in class processes in a really simple and fast way in order to get that customer clarity. So thanks a lot, everyone, for your time. Reach out. We'll talk more soon. Bye.